Because she doesn't really like Truman all that much. And she knows, but she's very powerful and very famous because of this show, because of this job. So, and she does not want to lose that. So, but she's sensing that it's going away from her. She can tell he's not interested. They're having trouble conceiving a child. There's not the connection there. The initial impact she had on him is sort of dwindling. So I think there's this feeling that it's falling apart. So her smile gets a little bigger and a little bigger. And
welcome to our Part 3 video covering The Truman Show. If you haven't seen our behind the scenes, you might want to check that out. Otherwise, let's begin covering the final movie itself. The Truman Show begins with a montage of cast and crew sermonizing about the show itself, and it shows us right away that the people on the show are justifying the exploitation of a human life while proclaiming their virtue for doing so. Christoph begins speaking for everyone in the world by saying that we are tired of certain things and how sincere his world is. Then, of course, there's Hannah Gill, who states she lives a noble life. The only one who shows some honesty is Louis Coltrane, who states that everything is controlled. So let's take a look at these three characters. First off, Christoph. When taking the part for Christoph, Ed Harris tried very hard to understand this character's frame of mind. He wanted to figure out why Christoph would make this false world his life, and that was where he came up with the idea that Christoph had a horribly lonely childhood and was teased incessantly. To explain this, Harris came up with the idea that he would have a humpback, but as we discussed in earlier videos, that idea was tossed out.
Had a very unpleasant childhood, really grew up troubled. He wanted to create this idyllic world for another child.
I don't doubt that the performance in this final film reflects this mentality completely. Christoph is very controlled and protective of Truman. There is also the suggestion that he loves Truman dearly like a son. The problem is, Christoph wants Truman to be what he wants him to be, rather than allowing Truman to make those choices for himself. You will see Truman constantly manipulated and steered throughout this film, and these are designed by Christoph to keep Truman in his place. Christoph is not really a villain until the last moments of the film, where he tries desperately to contain Truman and endangers his life on the boat. Christoph wants to protect Truman like a child, and yet he can't see the world he created stifles and depresses Truman. Hannah Gill is just a terribly self-absorbed woman. Laura Linney stated that her character is an ambitious actress who wants to be the star, and as a result, she resents Truman because he is taking her spotlight. Hannah is insanely rich from this performance.
It's been reported that Christoph is, in fact, resentful of the enormous amount of money you've made off the show. I think ranking you as the third richest woman in the world, right behind the Queen of England and Oprah Winfrey.
forgive me for correcting you, but I just eclipsed Her Majesty last month.
And she has lowered herself to do anything to be on this show, even prostitution, which she must perform for Truman.
Is the sex between you and Truman genuine, or are you just doing it for the money? Well, I understand that you are compensated for each sex act.
I didn't get a clearance for that question.
No, that was on the list. There was a phone message on your machine last...
Stop the camera.
No,
Just get Christoph on the phone now. What was that?
Though Truman thinks they are married legally, they are not, because their marriage was done by an actor, not an ordained professional.
Though I'm not officially a priest, I have been ordained by the Screen Actors Guild.
Now, the deleted clips I just showed you are from an excellent companion to this movie called The Making of the Truman Show that narrates the Truman Show as if you're the audience inside the film. It is easily found on YouTube. The quality of the picture is not great, but it's the best we've got. And it's a VCR transfer from the old days. And I suggest you check it out if you desire more understanding of this film for repeat viewings. There are also several deleted scenes that expand the underbelly of the cast and crew of The Truman Show, and we will cover them as well later. Despite this, the film itself shows us just enough to know about how corrupt the makers of this show are, and it is effectively done in the final product. Most of the characters in this film grandstand while taking part in imprisoning an innocent person and manipulating his entire life for entertainment and profit. The only exception to this is Louis Coltrane, who is just as much a victim as Truman himself. Why do I say this? Well, Louis came to the show when he was in elementary school. He was conditioned and exploited by his mother to be Truman's friend and to accept this world as his reality. Obviously, he would learn the truth as he grew up, but that's the reality he knew growing up in. He did not come into the show knowing what he was doing. This is some seriously psychological crap to put this kid through, and Noah talked about this in some of his interviews covering the character.
Must have been very, very difficult for Louis, to have this burden as a child. I think that creates a very interesting sort of almost psychotic split in this character who has to be false perpetually to the person who is authentically probably his best friend in the world.
As time went on, Truman became Noah's responsibility. He exists to be there for Truman as a shoulder to cry on and as a friend to support him. Obviously, he is given marching orders by Christoph, but clearly he cares for Truman deeply. And this was shown in 2 deleted scenes. The character of Louis Coltrane is just an amazing character study, and he is quite complex. Sadly, a lot of this depth was deleted from the film, but it's there in his performance. So this brings us to Truman himself. When he was born, Peter Weir and the marketing material gave insights about the genesis of this show. The corporation that owned the baby planned to do a year of the Truman Show selling baby products, but it was so successful that it grew beyond. Weir specifically stated they added a garage to the house first, where the father came in, and finally it would be Christoph himself who suggested they go all out and cover his lifetime. Weir even went so far as to explain how Christoph raised finances to achieve this. It just goes to show how detailed Weir's approach was. As for the community of Sea Haven, which was perfect for this film, there are things to note during the movie. First off, throughout the film, there are hidden cameras. Weir purposely put a lot of black dots on the set to look like cameras, and during the film, you can discover many of them. I'm willing to bet that no one ever identified them all, though. Also, when you see the streets, notice that they are all named after Hollywood stars like Lancaster Boulevard and so on. It's just another nice detail for avid fans. Despite the beauty of this community, the environment is actually a villain in the film because it's designed to trap Truman and surrounded by water to intimidate him. Now, I have heard some critiques that Jim Carrey was overly hammy in this movie, and I don't think that's correct in any way. Truman was raised by actors in a TV show for mass audiences. His over-the-top portrayal and 60s and 70s sitcom delivery makes exact sense for this movie. Originally, the introduction of Truman was a bit different. He would wake up to an alarm with a camera in it, and Meryl would plug how good their mattress was. Then, he would do his morning exercises before going into the bathroom. There were different takes of the mirror sequence. Carrey had a ton of ideas, and Weir allowed him to go with it. But the deleted one was Truman playing what looked like Genghis Khan, and then Santa Claus. After getting ready, Truman would sit down for breakfast with Meryl, and she got a new gift for him, a craftily plugged advertisement for an exercising outfit for his morning workout. The best part of this scene is her telling Truman to make sure he took his daily vitamin D, because Truman has never been in real sunlight, and therefore would have a deficiency in that area. After this was cut, the idea remained in later scenes when Truman is sitting in the kitchen, and a bottle can be seen of vitamin D next to his arm. They wanted these details in the film, and it just shows how tight this film is. Now, after the light fell, there was some cut footage that you could see in the trailer that showed the damage in the sky being repaired. A nice little touch is that in Truman's car you hear classical music, and that's pretty much all you will hear in this movie. This music would have a calming effect on Truman, but it also allows the Truman Show to not pay royalties to anybody. Thus, they can make more money every minute. There was a deleted scene where Truman stopped to get coffee from a street vendor, and it was good to cut. But the coffee vendor did show up in later footage of the film. She is one of the targets of the Free Truman movement on Sylvia's wall, and they did contact her. We will cover this when we get to that scene, but suffice it to say, you don't see much more of this character except during the search when she is arm-to-arm with Larry, one of Christoph's minions. Larry is basically a handler of sorts, and you will see him constantly hovering around areas where Truman is when there is larger groups of people. Larry is evidently a contact to report when Truman is doing something unpredictable, because you can see him reporting into his mic when Truman panics after seeing his father. You will later see Larry in deleted scenes where he is handing scripts to all the major actors while adjusting to the change-up of Meryl to Vivian. Larry is seen a lot in the background during this film, and it's a lot of fun to find him, so I'm not going to point out each time you see him. But if you look at the mobs of people, sooner or later you will see him lurking not far off, keeping tabs on Truman. The twins in the film, Ron and Don Taylor, were rumored to be hired to direct traffic, but a family member stated they were hired as security guards. The two twins were real friendly with everyone. They live near Seaside, Florida, and they joked around a lot on the set. Weir suggested they have a little part in the film, and they jumped at it. Weir didn't have to ask us twice. The characters the twins play are
Second Assistant Director Don and second Assistant Director Ron.
Although the twins come off real nice to Truman, they are not nice when things are not going smooth.
Take another man and get down there now, all right?
I don't give a damn. Just find the son of a bitch.
Well, get some batteries. This guy's not going to glow in the dark. Let's get him down here.
Now, a really good deleted scene that I think should have remained in the film is when Truman goes on his lunch during the first day. It shows more of his routine, and he goes to the deli where he gets a meatball sandwich. While he's sitting at a bench reading, a homeless person in a wheelchair comes up to him with brand new shoes, which is a really dumb move on the showrunner's part. Anyways, Truman gives the man his meatball sandwich compassionately. Later in the movie, Truman would see this man jogging and identify him by the new shoes, and we will cover that scene later. Now, I could point out all the manipulations that the makers of The Truman Show utilized to keep Truman in fear, and there are a ton of them, but I think that takes some joy out of the film, because each time you see it, something new you never noticed before becomes apparent if you are looking intently. I will point out some subtle things later in my coverage, but obvious things like testing Truman to go on a boat and having one sunk right next to it seems a bit unnecessary. I will say that this scene is one of the few where I questioned whether it was a silly idea, because why would they challenge Truman to do a job that involved water, and thus giving him an opportunity to conquer said fear? Despite this, it's just another example of how cruel the showrunners are to put him in this situation. During my research for this movie, I came across a fellow YouTuber who does vlogs and video essays, and I want to specifically hone in on his Truman Show videos. And I suggest, if you like this movie, to check him out, because in one of his videos he pointed out something that I really loved. When Meryl comes home, Truman can be seen in the flower bed, specifically around a round pot that is upside down with a figure on top of it. It's in his backyard, and his butt is strangely to the camera, as if he's blocking what he's doing. In Christopher Bingham's video, Truman Knows All Along, he proposes that Truman is actually working on his tunnel at this point early in the movie to escape, because he already knows that he's a prisoner at Seaside. He suggests that the film is actually analogous to Truman outacting the actors and planning his escape. Thus, he plays everyone. Now, it just so happens that my son is in his junior year of college studying architecture, so I asked him to look at the hole in the Truman Show movie, what it would be like to get through any ceiling like that. And what he told me was house construction and concrete depth is all about the climate. Let's assume that the Truman Show is in a hot climate or a spring climate. Let's cut out harsh winters, because the newspaper at Truman's job on the first day is Thursday, December 12th. If the house is built in a hot climate, Truman would have to dig through about 4 inches of concrete and then go through the dirt. If it was spring weather, it would be 6 inches of concrete. So, light to worst case scenario, and taking into account the house is architecturally accurate, there should be around 4 to 6 inches of concrete and 3 to 4 feet of dirt above the basement ceiling, which is made up of clearly visible plywood. Now, we know there are cameras in the basement, and if Truman was digging at concrete, he would be covered in concrete powder and dirt after doing so. The showrunners and the world would definitely be able to tell he's up to something when he would walk out of the blind spot of that closet. So it's pretty obvious Truman would have to take his time digging as not to cause suspicion. This causes a real question if Truman could have done this in 4 days. Also remember that this kid had a guy jump out of a box when he was young saying he was on TV. Then there was Sylvia telling him that everyone knew everything about him and she predicted that they were coming for her, and they did out of the blue. Would anyone ignore such memories? It would make an imprint on how you view reality. So let's create 2 obvious scenarios. The first one is Truman doesn't know at the start of the movie and ignores all the events of his past that were really strange. And after the light fell, he began digging through a minimum of 4 inches of concrete and 3 or 4 feet of dirt while living his life, avoiding the cameras, in less than a week. Because technically, according to the film, the movie takes place in under a week, based on the newspapers we see in the film and the linear cuts of the story. It would break the film's logic if he started digging on the first day of the movie, because he would have to cause a ruckus and be visibly disheveled to dig out of there fast. However, there's nothing wrong with ignoring such things and just willingly suspending your disbelief, which is fine. There are many films I love with logical fallacies within them, but that doesn't make those films fully believable. So let's try another scenario. Truman knows something is seriously wrong in his world, and Merrill is constantly plugging commercials, which has happened his whole life, everyone around him for some reason. He knows there are cameras on him, and he plays his part while secretly planning his escape through the basement 1 inch at a time. When he breaks through most of the concrete, however long it took, he waits for the right moment to enact his escape. The falling light and the appearance of his father are the catalysts to play his part like a professional actor, and he then escapes. These 2 are just quick sample scenarios that I made up on the spot, and I could probably come up with a dozen more if I put my imagination to the test, since after all I used to be a writer once upon a time. The thing I grapple with since looking into this is that Truman had to be digging long before the light fell from the sky to make the film plausible. I never thought about this before I saw Christopher's video, and I'm kind of surprised at that. I thought I paid attention to details. Anyways, Truman did not bang on the ceiling with a jackhammer one night, get himself covered in crap, and then walk around the house to clean himself up. It would have been seen. Because if you look at the shot seen in the film, there is only dirt on Truman's ladder and floor. There is no concrete dust, so clearly he cleared out the concrete before going after the dirt. Now, since I like to look at all sides of the argument, there is one major hurdle to the concrete hole in the ceiling being made before day 1 of the movie. Remember that first night? There was a major rainfall. With no concrete under the dirt, there would be flooding in the basement, unless Truman devised a way to collect the water. And if anyone has ever heard a leak in their house during a heavy rainfall, it's not that easy to remain unnoticed by those living there, especially when there are cameras in the vicinity, with the ability to capture sounds of pounding water being collected. What I will say is, hats off to Christopher Bingham. I find this a wonderful hypothesis, and I honestly think this issue is best left debated by you, my viewers, because I have watched this movie with both possibilities in mind, and the movie works either way. I'm still thinking about the scenarios at the moment, and have yet to come to a conclusion, and perhaps you folks in the chat can help flesh out the possibility for or against the theory so I can actually come to a final conclusion for myself. So let's move on to the next thing in the movie. The next deleted scene had Meryl advertising clothing and a narrator telling the audience where to go to buy it before she is told that Truman is in the kitchen. He then leaves to hang out with Marlon, even though she wanted to have a special night with him. Thus, this is the moment where Meryl is realizing she is losing sway over Truman, which was spoken about during the interview at the beginning of this video. Now, the beer Marlon shows off to the camera is actually later seen in the movie at the Truman Fan Club bar. You gotta look close, but it's there. Now, one thing to notice about Marlon is that he is really not like any of the others when talking to Truman. When Truman talks about leaving, Marlon does not shut Truman down. Rather, he listens and then gives his perspective of how he likes where they are. Just after this, there was a deleted scene where Truman showed his friend the light that fell from the sky, but it didn't really add anything to the film. Back to the theatrical footage, we see Meryl contrast Marlon by shutting Truman down after he gives his idea to explore somewhere. She cites financial obligations, thus trapping Truman to remain where he is. At the beginning of day 2, there was a deleted scene where Truman is exercising in his new outfit that Meryl bought for him the day before. The scene is very Jim Carrey, with over-the-top moves and a couple watching the show trying to keep up with Truman's moves. I'm very glad this scene was not inserted in the movie, as it's way too wacky, and it feels like tonal overload for what they're trying to do in this film. At the town center, you can see Larry reading a newspaper waiting for Truman, and next to him is the woman who is out with her dog. When Truman sees his father, she will be one of the people who rushes to take the man away. And after all is done, the dog finds itself free and running somewhere on its own past Truman. Truman's father is played by Brian DeLate, and the actor he plays is named Walter Moore. In The Truman Show, he is known as Kirk Burbank. Now, what we can tell about this character Walter is that he was once a young, strapping actor who, since the early scripts, was a ladies' man. In one of the flashback scenes, you can see Walter messing around with younger ladies rather than paying attention to little Truman, who snuck past barbed wire and then climbed a rock face. Without enthusiasm, he was forced off the show. At this moment, he snuck back onto the set to force his way back onto it. Now, you can assume many things as to why he did this, but the one thing you could probably rule out is that he is not doing it to tell Truman he's on television. If his intent was to do that, he would have said something the moment he was near Truman, knowing that he would be whisked away shortly. He would also be seen happy as a clam in later deleted scenes to be back on the set. After his reunion with Truman, he would also be part of the search party that's intention was to keep Truman confined. So his intentions are not for Truman, but rather himself. Now, Truman's mother is no better than her on-screen husband either. In fact, she is worse and just as manipulative as Meryl, which is pretty sad. In the making of The Truman Show, she was stated to be a great actress.
Christoph said he could only think of me in the role because to him I was the embodiment of motherhood, which showed how little he knew me.
When Truman was a baby, she pretty much had the most important role in the show, but as Truman aged, she grew less relevant. She now sits waiting for something to do. She is unable to leave and is a prisoner herself in the dome.
I'm a prisoner, and yet I have the financial means to do anything. I mean, I could buy the Ritz Hotel in Paris. I just couldn't go there.
This obviously causes resentment in her, and she can be seen manipulating Truman in subversive ways to make him feel bad. Some would categorize her actions as mentally abusive.
You sailing off into that storm, but I've never blamed you, Truman. And I don't blame you now.
She's also a bit competitive and condescending with other cast members because she thinks she's still a star and believes she has more to offer than those currently in the spotlight. Just watch her facial expressions when she's around Meryl or her husband Kirk later in The Search. She is more annoyed than anything. In the next scene, it would be Meryl who would annoy Truman by telling him how to talk to his mother and not even inquiring of his experiences, as if him seeing his father was nothing, before plugging a commercial about lawnmowers. And this is where I will plug our next video, which will finish our coverage of The Truman Show. And until then, let's try to find something productive to do.
Dal? You okay?
Never better. Just doing some intestinal yoga.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps a bunch, but sharing helps more.